building on the top hill. They used the greatest resources for that. Second, they built the schools, and then they built their homes. And many people died of starvation, cold, in the process. They thought of God first. They thought of the future second. They thought of themselves last. Amazing history. Go to Plymouth Rock sometime. You'll see. You'll see the reality of the beginnings of our nation. People believed that somehow it would be a new nation based on Christianity, religious freedom, ultimately all nations of the world coming together. What for? For the purpose to receive the Messiah, to receive the Word, and to ultimately spread it out to all nations. Since that time, the concept of American democracy has been the model for other countries in the world, even with its shortcomings. It was the first time in history that a king in the position of leadership stepped down voluntarily from his post and gave it to another person. George Washington. Never before in history had a king done that without being assassinated first, exiled, or die of natural causes. There's a very important tradition, ultimately, of Christianity and democracy. The democratization of Christianity through the Reformation, and the democratization of people in terms of other aspects, in terms of the American Constitution. When you listen to James Madison, he said, the American Constitution is based on the principle of a moral and ethical people. Otherwise, it doesn't work. When Washington and Jefferson and those people got together in the First Continental Congress, they knelt in prayer. That was the first thing they did to offer that concept of nation. They didn't know what they were doing, so they prayed for guidance. We don't know the importance of our nation. Since that time, English has become the spoken language around the world. We shouldn't be arrogant. English isn't that great in some respects if you study other languages. It just happens to be the case. Look at the technological, scientific advances. Look at the advances in communication in America. What's it all for? Why did it happen so rapidly, even in this last century? For the same purpose that Rome had developed. To ultimately be the vehicle for the Messiah, to spread the message to 4.5 billion people in the world. Fascinating history. You study the history of our early founders. Many of those presidents went to seminaries, theological training. So we need to understand the roots of our history and the importance of America. The question is, now, 200 years later, is America succeeding or failing? You know, we look at the corruption in our governments. People are elected so they can be elected again. We look at the corruption even in our religious institutions in America. We look at the problems of our future leaders. That's why this seminar is so important, to understand what it means to be a leader of our nation. Why? Not just for our own sake, ultimately for our future and the future of the world. America has always seen itself in a position to try to protect democracy around the world. Now, in many cases, we've made some real big blunders. But you know something? For as much as people criticize our nation, and usually that criticism comes from mostly from our own citizens, you look at the history of America and what it has given gratis to the development of nations without expecting anything in return. What it did to reestablish Japan's culture. What it did to reconstruct Germany after World War II. The incredible war debt that France has for America, we wrote it off. All these things. We've made many problems too. We had slavery in America. George Washington never solved that one. And so it took 100 years and another war to solve it. We're finally trying to make our way to understand what is real freedom, real democracy. I think that process is still going on. And yet our nation is in a great test today. Are we ready? Have we made a foundation of faith, especially through Christianity, and foundation to receive the Messiah? If Jesus were to come again, would people recognize who he was? I don't know. So many Christians are fighting with each other. Christian denominations are saying one church is going to heaven, the other is going to hell. There will be many John the Baptists in our society. many this time, to lead Christianity ultimately to understand who the Messiah is. Some of those John the Baptists will succeed, and some will fail. When we look at the historical parallels, we see not only these parallel situations here, but also parallels with the people themselves. A slavery period eventually evolving into a feudal period, ultimate liberation into a monarchic period where the people and the king were united. The Messiah could have come, and the tradition of God could have influenced the whole world. Ultimately, those traditions are destroyed, and monarchy doesn't become a great hope for God, but a bane on the society. It becomes a millstone around the neck of the people. And so because of that, we see a great democratization, a preparation for the coming of the Messiah. If these parallels have anything to do with the reality, which if you study history, you'll see. 4 BC to 392, about 400 years. Ultimately, this period ends at the year 800 when Charlemagne is crowned, the United Kingdom of Christianity. Exactly 800 years from the beginning. During this time, from 800 to 919, 119 years, we see this reign of Charlemagne and ultimately the divided kingdom between the Holy Roman Empire and the West Franks. This period continues until 1309, okay, when the papacy is moved to Avignon, France, for 69 years, not 70, 69. And finally, 1517, when Martin Luther establishes the first successful Reformation. If there is anything to these periods, then obviously we're talking about the turn of the century. What happened at the turn of the century? By that time, Christianity had spread pretty much all over the world. Presbyterianism, Methodism, Catholicism moved to all the countries of the world, being successful in many places and not in others. Thus fulfilling what Jesus said too at the end, spread my teaching, give my message to the world, and I will come again. At the end of Matthew, end of John, you can read it. So we see the foundation to receive the Messiah is now established on a worldwide level. What else do we notice? Well, what the unification view is suggesting is that we are at the end of another time period, a very important time, a preparation for the coming of the Messiah. We've already seen in other lectures that there are other indications suggesting we are living in an important time. And you don't have to listen to this to understand it. Who would have believed the very leader of the communist, the most important, the most strongest communist system, would not only dismantle communism, the very foundation of its nation itself, but would be allowed to do it? In America, if the president were to start dismantling democracy and start creating another monarchy, we'd either assassinate him or impeach him. Amazing what's going on in our world. Who can believe it? What's behind it? We are living in a very important time in history. There is no doubt about it. And you don't have to look at religion or you don't have to believe in things. You can just look at the facts. So many things point to it. So many things. So the question is, when? We're suggesting now. Suggesting that the possibility is now. What do we see in the world wars? On a global level, the Axis and Allied powers, two groups, two brothers fighting with each other. Again, Cain trying to kill Abel, Abel coming back. In the one case, Abel trying to kill Cain. When we try to destroy, through the Versailles Treaty, the Axis powers. It just created more resentment. And who was the enemy in the Second War? Again, Germany. Resentful as hell because of what we did to it through the Versailles Treaty. At the end of World War II, finally through the Marshall Plan and MacArthur's work in Japan, we finally embraced the brothers, and now we are the greatest of friends, and not only that, the most prosperous nations in the world. Germany, Japan, United States, England. Okay, so we see this happening, even now on a global level. Blocks of nations. Many people are suggesting, for many reasons, that we are living in the last days. People talk about nuclear holocaust. People talking about all kinds of things. Why? Because people realize there is something going on. As you know very clearly, the view of the unification movement is that the last days are not a time of Holocaust. It is a time of change. This change takes place ultimately by creating the worldwide level of the foundation of faith and substance. This change takes place at a time when the Messiah comes, just as Jesus did, to talk about a new understanding of truth. I want you to listen to what Jesus had to say about that. Even in his own time, John chapter 16, I have yet many things to tell you, but you can't bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak on his own authority. Earlier, Jesus said that even he didn't speak on his own authority, but by what he saw God doing. Okay? But whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify me. He will glorify me. For he will take what is mine and declare it to you. He'll have the same mission. He'll have the same mission. Second coming. All that the Father is mine, therefore I said that he will take what is mine and declare it to you. And so what happens when the second coming appears, when that person is chosen, ultimately we'll find an expression of new truth. Hopefully, then that Messiah, that person coming in the position of Adam, okay, just as Jesus came 2,000 years ago, to fulfill the three blessings and to separate from Lucifer's tradition, to establish a new tradition of love, life, and lineage. That truth will explain many of the things that Jesus could not explain. At one point, Jesus says to the Jews, he says, look, I didn't come to destroy the law. I came to fulfill it. What's your problem? Many times Jesus said, you know, the law says do not kill, but I tell you, even if you think of hatred or murder, you've already killed. It says do not commit adultery, but even just the thought of lust in your mind is adultery. He was trying to expand our understanding of the law. And so when the Messiah comes, he will not contradict Christianity or even Judaism. Just expand our understanding, contemporize it to the point where we will be able to take the message of Jesus 2,000 years ago and understand the things that even Jesus himself could not tell us at that time. And so as we know, the Messiah will have to create a new tradition, to establish a new lineage, to fulfill the three blessings, to become an ideal person, to get married, and to raise up an ideal woman ultimately, and to create an ideal pattern of what families and society should be, and how we should relate to the creation ultimately. So when? And how? There are many passages that says he'll be coming, and in fact, many people believe he's going to be coming on the clouds. How many of you have heard that before? Messiah is going to come on the clouds. I know, as a Catholic, that's what they told me. I can guarantee one thing, on a clear day, it's not going to happen then. Okay? Now, you know, we have never seen in history this kind of thing, even though things like that have been predicted. Let me talk about this a little bit, because this is important. So much symbology in the Bible has taken literally that many times it has taken us off track. This is what happened to the Pharisees and scribes. They got their nose stuck into their book so strongly, as Jesus said, they became a slave to the letter of the law, that they forgot what it was talking about. It says you point to the scriptures, thinking that in them you find salvation, but they point to me, and you reject me. How much it might be possible that we may be doing the same thing 2,000 years later. Look at this cloud situation, you know. Elijah, a great prophet, some 600-700 years before Jesus. Supposedly when he died, according to the Bible, he went up into a chariot of fire like you wouldn't believe. That'd make the 4th of July look like child's play. And so the Israelites were waiting for Elijah. At the time of Malachi, he promised, I tell you, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And those Israelites were looking for him. Where? Up there. Waiting for that chariot of fire. In Luke chapter 1, an angel came to a high priest in the temple and said to him, "Your wife will bear a son. His name will be great. And he will come in the power and spirit of Elijah. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, the children to their fathers, and he will make prepared a way for the Lord." This is almost identical to what Malachi says 400 years before, what Elijah will do. And Jesus even said, if you're willing to believe it, he's Elijah who's to come. What does it mean? John was in a position as the second coming of Elijah. He came in a position as a central person, just like Elijah 400 or 600 years before, to unite the people, to turn their hearts so that they could ultimately connect with the Messiah. Same mission, different man. We see this precedent. For a moment also, what we're suggesting is that when Jesus comes, it's possible, okay? I'm willing to believe, all right? For those of you who are adamant about this cloud stuff, all right? I'll accept the possibility that Jesus may come on the clouds. But for a moment, let me ask you to accept another possibility, a symbolic possibility. Jesus supposedly ascended into heaven, the clouds. And so the angel said, "Men of heaven, why are you looking up into heaven? Why? Why are you looking there? Don't you know that he will come as he came before?" And how did he come before? He was born in a barn. He was born in a poor situation, very desperate situation. Unknown to many, many people. Jesus did not come out of any clouds or anything. It's very possible, and this is what I'm suggesting, and you can judge for yourself, that the second coming of Jesus will be just like the second coming of Elijah. Now, Elijah really appeared. He was talking to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. He came back. He just lost his physical body. Jesus will come back also. Just that someone must have a physical body to fulfill these three blessings. Must be born on the earth. And so the clouds, as I understand it, are not literal. Let me just explain. I'll show you just one passage to show you that every use of this word is not literal. Listen to this. Hebrews chapter 12. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely." The concept of cloud means a gathering. The Messiah will come with his gathering, his apostles, the clouds. There are other things to suggest this, even in Revelations. I can point that out, but I don't have time. In Daniel, an Old Testament book, it predicted the Messiah would come on the clouds, but Jesus didn't. Some people say that this is prophesying the second coming. Hey man, the Jews weren't concerned about a second coming. They just wanted him to come and that was it. It's kind of a strange scenario, the idea that Jesus would have to come and die so he'd have to come again. I've heard a lot of soap operas that had better scenarios than that. Obviously, this whole issue of the return of the Messiah came when Jesus realized that he was not going to be accepted. Look at several instances also in the Bible that suggest that he would be born, even a new name. Let me just read another passage. Besides those on the board, you can write them down if you want. Now again, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to suggest another scenario for you to think about, okay? Revelations chapter 19. "His eyes are like a flame of fire." There's that fire again. "And on his head are many diadems, and he has a name inscribed which no one knows but himself. He is clad in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God." Pretty powerful imagery. A lot of imagery in that book, and it has caused confusion in Christianity ever since it was written. Even divisions in Christianity. I'd like to consider the possibility that the Messiah will be born on the earth. Why? He has to fulfill the three blessings. He has to stand in the position of Adam, just as Adam did at the very beginning of time. He has to bring physical and spiritual salvation. You cannot produce a family without a body. So the three blessings cannot be established except without I mean, unless you have a physical body. And this kingdom of heaven can be on the earth too. I mean, Jesus even prayed that way in the Lord's Prayer. So this is our understanding, that there's a great possibility that we are in the time of the second coming. And not only that, it is possible that he'll be coming in a very similar way as he came 2,000 years ago. He will be born. Now let's talk about this just a little bit. This is important, especially for most of us who come from a Christian background. We have created so many amazing images of Jesus that after a course of 2,000 years, I don't think he'd even recognize his picture. We have glamorized these nativity scenes and these pictures of all this kind of stuff to the point where I don't think it represents who he really was anymore. I mean, did Jesus really have this little halo on his head? You know, look at that. There we go. I mean, that's just one of them. Sitting up there with his hand like this, and he's always so peaceful, walking along like this. He can't make any mistake. His clothes are always so white, and it's almost like he walks along the surface, kind of 6 inches off the ground. These images that we have created has actually been a disservice to this man, this great, great man, this great person. Why did people draw those things? Because of the spiritual aura that they saw. But if Jesus really had a little ring of light around his head, don't you think the Pharisees would have seen, hey, man, this guy really is different? Don't you think? You think the people would have killed him if he really was so different? He looked like you and I. He was ordinary looking. That's what made it so difficult for the people. He wore dirty clothes just like you and I. He had sandals in his he had dirt in his sandals, and he went to the bathroom, and he ate. And I'm sure he stumbled and fell many times. And I'm sure he, made problems sometimes with his brothers and sisters. It was very difficult for him to be recognized because he looked just like everybody else. He lived a life of suffering and indemnity. Misunderstood. Constantly misunderstood, especially by the Pharisees, scribes, the very important religious leaders, kind of like the popes of that time, the Christian ministers of that time. Those were the very people who misunderstood him the most. Let's compare this. Compare our time with the time of Jesus. What was he accused of? Go back to the Bible. Try to put yourself in his position. He had political motives. Hey, this is not really a religious man. He's really trying to create a problem here. You can read certain things in there, what the scribes and Pharisees said about him. Misuse of money. Hey, man, if anybody has money, they can't be religious, right? Have you ever heard that one before? I have. Accused of immorality, running around with tax collectors and sinners and harlots. He's a glutton, you know. They even said that he was Beelzebub in disguise. Can you imagine? Hey, if you saw a religious leader walking around with a bunch of prostitutes and hanging around with sinners, what would you think? Hey, I don't know, little rumors going on, you know, who he hangs out with. Look at the stories of Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Baker. I mean, maybe those are true. Jesus never consummated any kind of problem with those people. He went there because he wanted to help them. And those were the only people who would listen to him. That's why he went there. But what did it look like from a normal societal point of view? He was accused of heresy. He was accused of disobeying the law. That's why the Pharisees and scribes were always testing him. What about this coin? You're supposed to pay tribute to Caesar? What about a man who loses his ox in a hole on the Sabbath? Should he work on the Sabbath? Hey, come on, give us your answer. Jesus even said, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. Whoa, that was a problem. For a Jew, that was a problem. And that someone comes to claim that he can forgive sins, whoa, that was even worse. And it was getting worse and worse by the day. He even said at one point, if you want to follow me, you must hate your mother and father, your brother and sister, your husband and wife, and follow me. If you want to be worthy of me, you must love me more. Heavy duty. heavy duty. He was accused of breaking up families. Can you imagine? Is that what he meant? No. He meant that his way was necessary not only for those people, but even for their families, because he was bringing a new tradition. But how would it have been heard and listened by the people's families? Hey, wonder if you were following a person who said, well, you know, I've got the better way, even better than your own parents. Follow me. What would your parents say? Whoa, watch out for that guy. He's going to break up families. I'm not making this stuff up. You can read it, okay? I'll stop there. I just want to say something to close. If we are living in the time, and if the Messiah comes, and who knows what method, who knows what means, you know, only God knows, really. And he'll let us know. I think we'll have signs, just like they had 2,000 years ago. Not everybody will see the signs. Okay? But I think there will be signs, and I think this message will ripple out. It will begin to affect, just like the apostles did in Israel and what they eventually did in Rome. The message will get out, and it'll be up to people to decide whether or not it's true. That means there's a great responsibility on the part of human beings. This is a democratic society now. This is the time for the coming of the Messiah, so that each person can choose on their own, and nobody can tell you whether it's true or not. How do you decide? What should our attitude be at this time? Maybe you don't believe a word of this. That's fine. You can go back to your schools and study and, you know, live the way we always live. And, you know, St. Peter and James, those people, they didn't realize they were living in a special time of history. And how did they recognize who Jesus was if the scribes and Pharisees couldn't recognize him? They had a humble mind, an open mind. They had a pure heart. Blessed are the pure in spirit, for they can see God. There's a kind of attitude and a willingness to try and at least research the possibility. And they recognized who Jesus was because of their heart, not because of their intellectual abilities or their scriptural knowledge, because they didn't have that. So what should be our attitude? I would like to suggest something. If you think any of this has any possibility at all, one thing I'd like to suggest is that you pray about it. Now, maybe most of you have kind of sort of gotten out of the practice of that, but I would guarantee that everybody in this room has their own kind of little style of prayer. Meditation. You know, when you go out on your own, just think. I know you do that. So do that. Think about these things. And if you're not sure God exists, then ask God to help you understand. Just ask, hey, you know, if this is important, better let me know. You can talk plainly, okay? God's kind of a realistic person. Talk plainly. You don't have to make real pretty words or anything like that. Talk from your heart. Prayer, humility, research, open-mindedness. These are our attitudes. And ultimately, each one of us has to begin to reverse the fall in our life. Make a foundation of faith. Make a foundation of substance. You need to look for the person or persons who may be in a position at this time in history representing God, who at least may be able to give you insight and inspiration as to what directions to go. It may be your ministers, it may be your friends, it may be some of the teachers here. It may be any possible number of people, but one thing for sure, you can't let somebody decide for you. Can you imagine Jesus comes to St. Peter and says, come, follow me, and he says, let me go talk to my wife first. Or let me go ask my rabbi. What do you think the rabbi was going to tell him? Hey, this guy's dangerous. He's not Jewish, he's against the law, and he's going to create problems. Don't hang out with this guy. You can ask your priests, your ministers, you can ask your teachers, you can ask your parents and friends, you can ask anyone you want. But whatever they tell you, I would say, please include that in what I'm telling you. Put it all together. Don't believe this because I'm telling you, and also don't believe other things because they're telling you. In the end, the decision is yours, your responsibility. Personally, I think we live in a very great and glorious time in our history. But the outcome of it will depend on you and I, how quickly it comes about, and how much we work together to really establish this foundation of faith and substance so God can finally complete what he wanted to 2,000 years ago. I want to thank you very much.